So at this time, I want to introduce Mrs. Pat Furlong. Pat is someone that I have watched and read her stories for years about how she was an advocate for her children with DMD. And she is someone that I just admire. She's someone that I just think she's like my mentor, is what I've been calling her. She's just my mentor, and I text her, and she's always available to give me guidance and advice. And I want to first off, I want to say what she's done for the muscular dystrophy community as a whole has had so many far-reaching impacts on even what we are doing today. This event today would not be possible had we had trailblazers like Mrs. Pat Furlong. She's the one that taught me that we can be united, that we can have a strong voice, and that we can organize as patients. And it's because of her that we have this event today. I want to tell you that she's the founding president and CEO of Parent Project for Muscular Dystrophy. And this originally was PPDD, Parent Project Duchenne Dystrophy. And they changed the name to be inclusive of all muscular dystrophies. And would you please welcome her up to the stage, Mrs. Pat Furlong.
So first of all, can you hear me now? We're good? So first of all, I'm deeply honored to be here. I was surprised to be asked to be a keynote, but I'm entirely grateful to be here. I think you should really applaud yourselves to bring this limb-girdle community together with 400 people attending to think about what you can do together to change the trajectory of these diseases. So I am really blessed to be here, and I thank you for that. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about PPMD because everything in Washington has an acronym, so that's who we are, PPMD, and it's easier than saying Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy. I was asked to talk about the lessons from the Duchenne community to the limb-girdle advocacy community. And so I'll tell you a little bit about the work we've done, but I'll first tell you that I didn't plan to be in the muscular dystrophy community. And this is what I've learned over time, that the patient voice is the only thing and the major thing and the critical piece of changing the landscape of all diseases. So, by training, I'm a nurse. I have a master's degree from The Ohio State University, and we have to always have the or they get really grumpy. So my entire career was in adult medicine because I believe children shouldn't become sick, and certainly not my children. And I worked in whole organ transplantation and renal dialysis for most of my career. So in adults, all adults. And I married, and I had 4 children, and that's the Furlong family before this diagnosis. My husband is a physician, and we had a plan, as everyone does, that we would watch these children grow up and grow old, and then they'd hopefully take care of us in our old age. What I didn't know when I got married is that I carried a gene, a mutation in the dystrophin gene, and I was totally what was called an unknown carrier. So I got married, had those 4 beautiful children, and on a particular day in June, after complaining and worried, expressing worry to physician after physician after physician who said, "You don't like sick children, you're just worried about your own, you're just a neurotic mom," essentially, a doctor said out loud, "Your children have Duchenne muscular dystrophy." He also said to me that they will follow a progression where they're walking now, but they'll stop walking by 8 or 9. They won't be able to move their arms by 15 or 16, and they'll be dead in their teenage years. So, the plans for the family had changed dramatically in that day. And I started traveling around the world, pretending I was a doctor or pretending I was a researcher so I could get in major labs and I could ask questions like, what are the standards of care? What's the government doing? What's the interest in rare diseases? What are we doing here? And I got no help, and no help, and no hope, your children are going to die. So this is what I really wanted. I wanted a magic wand, and I wanted to get out of jail free, and I wanted to get out of this world of Duchenne muscular dystrophy because I found it scientifically fascinating, incredibly frustrating, and terribly heartbreaking. My sons died at 15 and 17. So, and this slide, the beginning of it, is from Sharon Hesterly when she worked for us, and then she went to well, roundabout, but then she went to Ask Bio finally, and so we miss her desperately. But this is where the patient voice is, and this is where we are, and we affect every single thing in this environment. From drug discovery, through clinical trials, we have to participate, through all the economic factors of a rare disease, through access and reimbursement, through policy in the United States. We are at the center of it all, because why would people develop therapies if we're not going to take them? Why would we have standards of care if they're not labeled for us in our particular condition? Why do we have therapies? We're going to have to access them. We're the center, and we have to understand that we are the center. So here's a few things that we do as PPMD. We started in 1994. We were around a kitchen table. I can't even tell you how crazy it was to say to ourselves, do you think we can do something? And we all kind of looked at each other and said, well, right now, the answer is no. And anything else we do is up. So if we get one yes, that's good enough. So we started. And then we decided we'd look comprehensively at this disease, and we'd look at it as a race. Research, advocacy, care, and education. And we would follow that track consistently. So where would we begin? So this is 25 years ago. And the first thing we did was we wanted centers of excellence. We wanted to know that research was going on in a particular focused area that focused only on Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And we decided after some searching that we would start the first center of excellence. It was at the University of Pittsburgh with Eric Hoffman. Eric was in the lab of Luke Kunkel from Harvard, who cloned the gene and then identified the protein product. We signed on a contract to give him $300,000 a year for 5 years running. We didn't have a dollar. But we can do stuff, right? So we raised that $300,000 a year for 5 years running, and then we also went out to UCLA and we created a second Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy Research Center, or DMDRC, because we know that inflammation is a critical part of this disease, much like it is your disease. So we wanted to look at not only replacing the missing protein, but to look at the process of inflammation and how do we attack that. We did feasibility studies on standards of care, and we began to shift the environment. So this was our business plan. What's the current state of research? You need to characterize the disease and characterize it well. What is the federal government doing? So I was harassing the Office of Rare Disease about what are you going to do about Duchenne? And finally, in 2000, they had the first meeting on Duchenne muscular dystrophy at the NIH that was focused on Duchenne. And we thought that was pretty spectacular. Our second research investment, in addition to those centers of excellence, well, you're not going to consider this a research investment at all, was to hire lobbyists in the US government, right? Because we said, what's the government doing? And the answer was not much. And people would apply for grants, but they wouldn't get them because Duchenne was rare and who cares at the NIH anyway? So on the back of a napkin one day in House Member Roger Wicker's office, we wrote the MD Care Act. Standards of care, centers of excellence, and a research plan. So once we wrote that on the back of an envelope, and then the lobbyist and everybody else turns it into legislative language, we flew out to the Muscular Dystrophy Association and said, we're going to have a show. We're going to have a congressional hearing on Duchenne and all the muscular dystrophies, and we have a bill to pass. And they brought their power, and that bill was passed and signed into law in 2001 under George W. Bush. So if you don't like him, we like him for that. And from then until now, an $800 million investment in the muscular dystrophies. So that was pretty spectacular. So this is what, when voices come together, these are the kinds of things that you can get done. It wasn't about us, it was about all of us. And that was what was so impressive about that day for me. So there was no data on Duchenne, certainly no coordinated data, and so we thought we better start thinking about that. Because when we looked at this drug development paradigm and how you get to therapies from discovery and idea to take it all the way to a therapy for patients, we looked under there and said, what are our pieces? What is the role we'll play under all those pieces? And so we divided that out. And here's a few of the things we've been doing. So we help support getting this disease fully characterized. So the center, the little center circle of that is what the pathways are in this disease that we have to think about. And then all around the periphery are targets for those particular issues. We wanted to improve care. So in the MD Care Act, there were demanded standards of care. And so the first one was published in 2010 on Duchenne and Becker, and the next iteration was published in 2018. But then when you're talking about care, so how do you know when you're going to a given center that they're going to follow the standards of care? You don't, right? And there's lots and lots of clinics that see people, so we wanted to make sure that was going to happen. So we got a steering committee together and we decided that we would create specific centers of excellence in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And the reason for that is because then parents or families or individuals with this disease going to those centers would know for sure that it was an interdisciplinary clinic and it would adhere to the standards of care. So we now have 26 in this country, and soon in Missouri we're going to announce an adult care center because now boys aren't dying in their teens. We're living to 20s and 30s and 40s, so we need adult care centers, and we'll begin to look at those. And we have international interest. We just certified a center in the Czech Republic. We've got a center in South Africa, and we have lots of other applications. So we're kind of saying to ourselves, that's above our pay grade, so we're working with international organizations to take over that program. So, that's Decode Duchenne. We offer free genetic testing to not only patients who have barriers, but also female carriers, so that they can understand if they're a carrier, because carriers at risk for some cardiac disease. And we started at Nationwide Children's a project to look at carriers and look at and understand their cardiac disease and understand their skeletal muscle disease as well if it was present. So we try to really leverage what we do so that we can take care of the families we deeply care about. In 2007, we started a registry because there was no data. So we worked with CDC and we started a registry, and the registry really is now 10 years old. And without going into the whole thing about it, I'm just going to show you what that registry has done. So these are the reasons, and you heard in these registry presentations, why start a registry? Why participate in a registry? Well, lots of reasons. First of all, you want a patient-reported registry, because I can tell you that our patient-reported registry is much more accurate than the clinical registry, and I'll tell you how. So in a clinic, when you go to the doc may report this young man lost his ambulation in May of 2020. Our report will say in May the 2nd at 3:30 in the afternoon, my son stopped walking. So we're pretty accurate. At 3:30, my son needed this. So we are very accurate. And then we interact with our patients because we answer the questions that they have within our registry. So a clinical registry is really important, and combining it with a patient-reported outcome gives us the most robust data to understand a patient population. So this is where we are with that registry. We have around 5,000 people in that registry. 80% is US, 20% is ex-US. We know a lot about these people and their genetic testing. We have their medical records. And we looked at that. We did a 10-year report. We've recruited for 60 trials. And one of the companies called us and said, we're trying to recruit for this trial. We have this marketing firm, and we're doing this and that. And we said, give us a month. And we recruited their trial fully. So we can do things with this registry because we can reach directly to the patients. And the registry is very tailored because we can, if somebody's looking for blue-eyed boys that are 4 years old, we know that, so we can find them. So we report that back to the companies who are developing therapies for us. Now we're about to embark on what we call the Duchenne Outcomes Research Interchange, and because everyone needs a good acronym, it's called DORI. So what we're going to do with DORI is Duchenne Outcomes Research Interchange 2.0, and I'm going to show you what we're going to try to do with this. And this is the first time it's ever been done, and we're partnering with Sarepta as this first effort is underway. We're going to take the patient-reported outcomes. We have some fancy technology that reaches into the electronic medical record. Don't ask me how it works, because technology is not my thing. And then the clinician-entered data goes into there. So that's going to go into this interchange. It's then going to be processed in analytics, so we have this combined data set. So we can really understand what's going on with these patients, how care is being given to these patients, how they are responding with that care, what they look like in terms of the patient-reported outcomes. And the Evolve Registry is a post-marketing registry. So this is a model we're trying to develop so that all companies could come in there, or companies that are interested, and they can silo their data so that they can see in their particular product how their patients are doing. So this is going to inform drug development. It's also going to inform payers, because as a community, we thought, okay, we're going to get this first approval, was Exondys 51, and we thought, now the rest is easy. Well, it turns out that payers don't necessarily think the rest is easy. And so our patients faced hurdles accessing this therapy. So we want to make sure that we can convince the payers that people need the therapies that are derived for them. So this is in collaboration with SMA. SMA has a very similar registry using the same vendors, so we've collaborated with SMA, and it's really nice, again, to bring the muscle diseases together so that we can better understand the patient population. So this is our comprehensive approach. We try to put these puzzle pieces together so that we can do a good job for our patients. Advocacy. I think advocacy is so critically important, and I think going to Washington or meeting your representatives in your home state is so critically important. Now, you're going to come across some people who aren't really interested. You know, you're going to go and you're going to tell your story. I have limb-girdle. I love somebody with limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, and here's what happens, and here's the impact on their family. And some of these people, very young, sometimes staffers, are somewhere else that day in their head. So if that occurs, you write a lovely letter to that representative. Dear Senator Wicker, I met Barbara, your staffer. She was wonderful. She so cared about limb-girdle muscular dystrophy that I was extremely blessed. That letter will be on the top of Senator Wicker's pile, and you'll become friends. So I think it's really important for you to know that seeing your representative and talking about your story, and it's not just a one-time visit, it's 3 months later, hi, it's my birthday today, I'm really worried about losing this function, or my son or daughter, or my partner, here's what's going on in my life, because relationships are bidirectional and they're continuous. So then when you go, wherever you go to meet them, whether it's at home or in Washington, they say, oh, I remember you. We had this conversation and you're really interested in these things. Get your points done, reinforce them, get things done. That's the only way the MD Care Act got into place. So I think that's really important to understand. And everyone can do it. It's a phone call. It's an email. It's not something you have to go somewhere to do. You can send an email and say, this matters to me and here's why. So this is the MD Care Act. It was reauthorized in 2008 because these bills have a 5-year shelf life. And because we have lobbyists, in 2014 we were worried that it would sundown, that the NIH and the Department of Defense and the Center for Disease Control would forget about it. So we, in a provision, wrote that there's no sundown to this law. So this law is in place forever. So you also can capitalize on the MD Care Act because it's all across the muscular dystrophies. And I'd walk in the office and say, this matters to me, and now it's time to emphasize limb-girdle. You've done well on Duchenne, you've done well on Becker, and you've done well on some of the others. FSH is coming along, so why not a Center of Excellence in limb-girdle muscular dystrophy? I think Jerry Mendell wouldn't mind something like that, neither would Catherine Wagner. So another group that's government employees that you might want to go see is the FDA. And why does that matter? Because the FDA, that's looking at some of the therapies coming forward in limb-girdle, has no idea what it means to live with limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. They don't know. They don't know what matters to you. And the only way they know what matters to you is if you show up on their door. So we've had a very long relationship because we went in first, and I think we were one of the first advocacy groups to go in the door, and they were like, I don't know what we're going to do with you. So we sat down and talked to them about what Duchenne meant and how hard it was and what the impact on the family was and the impact on the caregiver and the impact on society and the costs, the financial burden of some of these diseases. And they asked us to do a preference study, which means how much good do you want for how much bad you'll accept. And we did that and went back to them because, again, much like the government, there's a relationship. So we have a very long-standing, almost 8-year relationship with the FDA. So one of the times we went in, we said, listen, so much excitement about Duchenne, so many companies, why don't you write guidance? so that companies have sort of a playbook. And they said, no, why don't you write it? So I said, okay, and I walked out the door and thought, oh God, what did I do now? So we wrote guidance. From January 1st to June 1st of 2014, we wrote draft guidance, a 42-page document, and submitted it to the FDA. That made them sort of sit up and take notice. And then they wrote guidance using ours as a platform. And then they finalized their guidance in 2018. So we're about to open this guidance up again because we want to update it. So we also deal in all the policies. So if there's legislation that matters to us, we go talk about it. We send somebody up there with talking points and they talk about that policy because it's important. Again, showing your face. Sometimes it's just about showing up. And so we do that. And we show up and talk about the patient voice and talk about if this drug doesn't matter to me, I'm not going to take it. So here's what it has to do. And we talk about that a lot. So we have provisions in bills all the time. This is the patient impact, focused impact assessment. And this is because we were frustrated that FDA is told to include the patient voice, right, in drug development. But the real question is, how do you know? So we went to them and said, how will we know? You know, when a sponsor submits their NDA, how do we know that we're in there? So we don't. That's the truth of the matter. So we wanted to close the loop. So we developed the patient-focused impact assessment, or PFIA. That was a provision that went in faster cures because we were able to do that with our lobbyists and our friends on the Hill. And this means that the FDA has to tell us that they had that patient voice in that NDA that the sponsor submitted. So again, closing the loop with policy. And I think this is really, really important for us collectively to do. So we know. We have to know it's really important to our lives. We also had what's called a patient-focused drug development meeting. So this is in statute, actually, at the FDA, but we don't usually do things the way people like us to do. So we held a Compass meeting, and the Compass meeting was part of our advocacy agenda. We've been going to the Hill every year since 2000. So every February or early March, right before the budgets, we show up with about 120 people. We spend the first few days training people about what the asks are when they go to the Hill. We spend on Monday, we have another policy meeting, which in this case was a Compass report, and that way we explored how living with from diagnosis through adulthood is and how it affects our lives. We had at this Compass meeting about 26 FDA members, we had staffers, so we had about 200 of our Duchenne Becker families, and we had another couple hundred in the audience from government, FDA, CDC, et cetera. Because then we have many more tools to go to other government institutions and accomplish some of our goals. So I think this is really important to think about for your community, to have a Compass report. Let's look at the limb-girdle muscular dystrophies. Let's understand what living with is. Let's understand the pathways a little bit better. Let's understand what will make a meaningful difference in your life. And I recognize that it'll be different from all of you. But if we can get threads and themes, then we can move that forward as a group. And I think that's critically important for where you are now with really potential amazing therapies being developed. So that is our Compass meeting. We also think about the other end. What if we get these therapies approved, and how are we going to get them reimbursed? How are we going to get them billed for through the clinic and then reimbursed? So we work with the CDC, and we developed an ICD-10 code for Duchenne and Becker muscular dystrophy. Because before this, we were all lumped together as one. So payers didn't see the difference, and then, as you probably know, some services are declined, or some equipment is declined, and some care is declined. So we mapped out the ICD-10 codes to make sure that it is very accurate, so the data is accurate, and so we can make a case to the payers so that they reimburse the things that we need. And that's very important. So over time, we've done some things. We get a list of a business plan, and we check off the things that we want done, and we keep that going and keep that updated in the organization. And we try to engage this community as much as possible. And I think tonight, having all of these represented foundations together is pretty amazing. In Duchenne, we have 46 active foundations, and it's not always simple to get those folks together, but we try. But it's not simple, right? We still have challenges. And here's the challenge we're facing right now. This is our active clinical trials. It's pretty spectacular. We have exon skipping therapies, gene therapies, and then all the downstream that's being approached. So it is spectacular, but there's always a but, right? Here's the inclusion criteria. 7 to 10 years in gene therapy, it's 4 to 7 years old. Ambulatory, most of them want walking because that's an easier measure. Forced air climb or supine to standing in 8 seconds. Now, to be fair, I don't think there's a boy with Duchenne muscular dystrophy that cares that he gets off the ground in 8 seconds. To get off the ground is what he probably cares about. I think he doesn't care if he walks 6 minutes or how fast. I think he cares that he walks. So, but this really limits inclusion. So if you're little, if you're 3 years old, you don't get in trials. And believe me, if you're not ambulatory, it's pretty rough out there. So this is our inclusion criteria where we've mapped out who goes where. And so it's a challenge. So what are we going to do about this? And we've had failures, some trials that are failed, that we've put our heart and soul in, and then we learned that they didn't work. Also troublesome and hard. Also social media. No one's mentioned that here, but I'll tell you, we can unblind a trial pretty quickly in social media. Parents are putting videos online about what's different, so we can unblind trials, which isn't helpful to industry. But I think we have to understand that social media plays a role, and they also play a role for us about who cares and who they should see and what supplements they should take. More recently, we have some father telling us to all grow broccoli sprouts because that's going to cure something. I'm not sure what, but he thinks it is. And vulnerable people are on social media and hear these things. So we have to recognize it and address it. And I know that all of the groups are talking about having monitored these groups, but you can't, you're gonna have some rogue folks out there, so you're gonna need that, right? And then when you're in a trial, you're almost bursting with, let me tell you how I'm doing, right? And we all want sponsors to tell us individually how we're doing and give us the results. And I know, I can't imagine how many times many of the sponsors here aren't like, just give me the inside dope. What are you thinking? And they'll say, it's still blinded. No, but just give me the inside dope. So we all want that because we're anxious and time isn't on our side. So here's what we're doing now. On September 9th, we've been working for 18 months to think about a platform design trial. Could we think about getting those certified centers, trial ready, all of them, most of them are. Could we think about a platform design that is completely inclusive? Any patient at any age who wants to be in this trial. We would wash them in, wash them out of trials. We would look to see if somebody's responding or not. We're going to try. We think Children's Oncology Network has changed the course of cancer in kids. The Pediatric Heart Network has changed the course of heart disease in kids. So our question is, could we design and be disruptive about the current clinical trial process to make it more efficient, more inclusive, and hopefully faster? We'll see. September 9th might be the end of us, but we're going to really try. We're going to be disruptive because things have to change because none of us have any time. The other thing is we work with Critical Path Institute. I know that we've heard of natural history studies. We have about 6 natural history studies in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and they are siloed to very specific institutions, right? We know of a natural history study that was NIH sponsored, it was completed, it sat on the shelf for 5 years. We kept saying, let's look at the data, look at the data. It wasn't. Now another NIH grant says they're looking at the data, but we spent 5 years. So we signed up with the Duchenne Regulatory Science Consortium, which is DRISC, which is Critical Path. And so what the purpose of Critical Path is to get all the data, placebo from trials, natural history studies, do fancy bioinformatics on it to see if we can get a disease progression model. So that is underway and would contribute to our platform study. So those are the things we do. And now, first of all, I'm honored to be here. I see the variability in this disease. I see all of the list of alphabet for limb-girdle muscular dystrophies. And then Brad gave me questions about what you could do. So here are Brad's questions, and hopefully I've answered some of them. What's been the most challenging, time-consuming component of bringing treatments to the clinic? Getting them there, right? Certifying centers, making sure they're capable, driving consensus around care, because right now people with Duchenne are on steroids, and you can pull from behind your ear about the regimen they're on. There's about 20 different regimens. And a child on a regimen of steroids at 3 years old is different from a child on a regimen of 5, and 10 years on steroids makes you different. So I don't know how we can look through that noise to understand studies. That's a challenge for our community. The data collection in silos at academic centers, that's a challenge for us. And we get very grumpy about it. And we go to NIH and talk to them about it because in an NIH grant, they say we encourage our academics to share the data. Well, encourage is different than you've got to do it, right? So we're trying to work with NIH to change their language a bit, to make it a little more interesting for those grants and to share the data. And outcome measures. How do you measure? Who do you measure? What's the length of time? In 12 months, sometimes nothing happens in terms of obvious change. So we have to ask the patients and families what's meaningful to them. So those are some of the challenging and time-consuming issues we've faced. Is there anything you'd do differently to start the journey today? A lot. I would start the registry and collect patient-reported outcome. I would have done that on day one. And I would never give a grant unless I would never give a dollar to any person anywhere unless they were sharing the data. And I think that we would go to the FDA or the NIH and change some of that policy around, and we're working on a little bit about that. What's the most important thing patients and family members can do to speed the development? You can participate in registries. If a patient-reported outcome registry is saying you give us data every 6 months and there's an app to do it, do it. Just do it. Because that data is so important. And I know you kind of say it's a pain in the neck, but the more data you have, the more those bioinformatics people can make sense of it, the more inclusive you can be about trials. So participate. You are by definition an advocate because who's going to take care of you but you and your family? So participation matters. And the more you participate, the better. Partnering. We're all in this together. You have inflammation in this disease, we have inflammation. We just had a big meeting on inflammation. Can we track it better? Can we do it better? We should be talking about that together, not in silos, not by ourselves. So what challenges do you see in the US healthcare system in access to gene therapy? I don't know. We'd all need a bottle of wine or 3 if we want to discuss that. I can say to you that we can make the case for gene therapies. We have health economists talking about this. We have to make the case of gene therapies because it can really change lives and they're worth investing in. And I think by working together as a community, I'd love to start with a congressional hearing. We did it in 2000. We could do it again and talk about value, right? And impact. And the impact that a muscular dystrophy disease has not only on the person with it, but their family, their employment choices, what happens in their lives, and then what happens in society. We owe it to ourselves and to this society to make sure that people have access to gene therapies. So that is a congressional hearing that we should do together. And they haven't seen us since 2000, so it's about time, right? And how can we work together on policy? These are policies that matter to us. Policies around access to therapies, access to care, access to services, policies around employment, and the fact that you can't make a certain threshold without losing your services. All of that is unfair and unacceptable, and I think we can change it. So, this is my end, and thank you for listening. You can't change your destination overnight. I didn't get the get out of jail free card, but you can change your direction, and I think together we can do that. We'll do just that together. Thank you.